When you wrote the book Forbidden Archaeology, and there are some incredible things in there that would make one think that humankind has been around for a long, long time. Was there anything that was the most compelling for you? Was it those small steel balls, for example, you were telling me about, Michael, that were found that looked like they had some kind of marking on it or something? Remember those little small steel balls?
Well, those are from South Africa. There are some miners there have found these very interesting round metallic objects. I call them metallic because they're made of hematite, which is a naturally occurring type of iron. And what's the most interesting feature of these objects is the parallel grooves that go around the center of each of them.
Yeah, each one of them has that groove.
Well, one groove or two or three or four, but most of them have several, and they're parallel, and they go all the way around. Now, some skeptics will say, well, it could be possible that these round objects could have formed naturally, but then somebody took them out of the ground and made these grooves on them. But I've been to South Africa. I visited the chief mining engineer from the mine where these objects come from, and he showed me like a solid block of rock, a solid block of stone, with many of these round hematite objects solidly embedded in the stone with the grooves. You could see the grooves on the part that extended out of the stone. Like, some of the round objects were kind of partially sticking out of the stone.
And how big were they, Michael?
But they're about 1 or 2 inches in diameter. They're different sizes. They're not big like basketballs or small.
But they're not little BBs.
No, they're not like little BBs either. They're medium size, 1 or 2 inches in diameter. And the ones that were partially sticking out of the stone, they also had the grooves going all the way back around into the solid stone. So you can't say that, well, somebody just took these things and engraved these marks on them. Although those are very interesting, and to me they were very interesting because they're found in layers of solid rock about 2 billion years old. To me, they're very interesting until somebody can come up with some convincing naturalistic explanation how those things could have formed naturally in the layers of the earth. I think we have to consider the possibility that they were made by someone with human-like intelligence. Now, people have had a lot of different theories, to explain them. Some explain them as maybe perhaps having been left by time travelers, and others propose some kind of extraterrestrial explanation. And I favor the idea that they were made by some kind of beings with human-like intelligence that were existing on Earth in those very ancient times. But what's been more fascinating to me is not any one particular case, but to me what was most fascinating was the sheer number of cases. When I first started this research back in 1984. It took me 8 years to do the research for this book, but I didn't think it was going to take 8 years. I thought, well, I'll do 8 weeks of research. I'll find some interesting cases. I'll write a little article or maybe a small pamphlet about it, and then I'll go on to something else. But when I actually started looking into it, when I actually started looking into the original archaeological reports, not what you find in the textbooks, but going back to the original archaeological reports over the past 150 years in all the different languages, German, French, Spanish, Italian, English, Russian, when I started looking at those original archaeological reports, I found one case after another of this evidence for extreme human antiquity. And it added up to hundreds of cases. The 8 weeks of research turned into 8 months. The 8 months turned into 8 years because one case just led to another. And to me, that was the most astonishing thing. Not that there were 1 or 2 striking cases, but that there were literally hundreds of these cases that weren't being mentioned in the textbooks, although they are there in the original scientific literature.
There's a moon of Saturn that looks much like those metal balls we were just talking about.
Somebody sent me a picture of that.
Yeah, it's Iapetus. is the name of the moon.
Right, Iapetus. Right.
And
somebody sent me a picture of
the
that.
ridge that goes around the equator is 60,000 feet high, but it's you really could look at your materials that you were just talking about and this moon, and they look almost the same. It's weird.
Yes, it is. Maybe there's some kind of connection there. People have offered some different kinds of suggestions. Maybe these things are game pieces. Maybe they could be models of
spent fuel of a craft. Maybe
that's a possibility, or models of different objects in the solar system.
Well, I don't know. It is bizarre now. But of everything that you uncovered in forbidden archaeology, what's the one that baffled you the most? The one that really got you interested? Was it these metal balls, these iron balls? What?
Well, the case that I always found most fascinating, maybe it's because I live in California, is the California gold mine discoveries. I mean, that's what I found to be very, very interesting, because the miners, they came to California during the gold rush days, and they went to the Sierra Nevada mountains, and they were digging for gold. And to get the gold, they were digging tunnels into the sides of mountains, like Table Mountain, which is near Sonora in Tuolumne County in Central California.
Right.
And deep inside these tunnels, maybe 1,000 or more feet inside in the solid rock, they were finding human skeletons, human artifacts, and it was just amazing. And what I found really amazing is that these discoveries were reported by the chief government geologist of California, a man named Dr. J.D. Whitney, and he wrote a huge report about them that was published, by Harvard University, which is the most famous university in the United States. And despite that, these things just were not mentioned in the textbooks.
Why?
And it was because of this process of knowledge filtration. There was another scientist who was living at the same time as Whitney. His name was William Holmes, and he was an anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. And what he said was, and he was a more prominent scientist than Whitney in the scientific establishment in the United States, so his pronouncements were considered authoritative. So what he said was, he said, if this Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, then he wouldn't have announced those discoveries despite the imposing array of testimony with which he was confronted, because he had cases from all over the gold mining region, not just one place. So I thought that was just really fascinating, because it showed that the reason why these discoveries were put aside was simply because they contradicted the theory of evolution. And it was directly stated by the scientist that this was the main reason why he was rejecting them. And I just found that to be just so amazing, that evidence can be rejected simply because it contradicts the theory of evolution. Now, what I found even more fascinating was that these objects, some of the discoveries, are still in the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. So a few years ago, there was a television producer named Bill Cote who produced the first big film that he produced that was shown on television was about the Sphinx. He was the one who brought the work of John Anthony West,
who was just on the program,
and those people who showed that the Sphinx was far older, than most scientists now believe. Then he got into this other topic, and he got in touch with me, and he said he would like to put some of the material from Forbidden Archaeology in his next NBC television special, which was called The Mysterious Origins of Man. And I told him, well, one case you should probably try to get some film on would be these California gold mine discoveries. So he went to that museum at the University of California at Berkeley, but they just refused to let him film the object.
Why?
They gave him all kinds of excuses. First, they said, well, you're making a television program. You probably have a very tight deadline.
Yeah.
He told, I've got 6 months to do the show. Could we have a look, please?